Welcome to Resiliency Within. I'm Elaine Miller-Karas, and for the first time since launching the show with Voice America, I won't have a guest. Today, I am both the host and the guest of my own show. So before we begin, I want to acknowledge that my reflections and perspectives are my own and may not necessarily reflect the views of my sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute. So today's episode is entitled Finding Light in the Darkness. And what does that mean? I'll say that no matter how heavy or uncertain um, we may be experiencing life right now, the world may feel like, oh, I don't know if I can ever get out of this darkness. Light is always present, sometimes within us, sometimes in the love and support of others, and sometimes in the simple beauty of the world around us. And I think it's so important that we remember that light has the power to guide us through even the most difficult times. And if you find yourself in that moment of darkness, I invite you to take a pause. And maybe we can do this right now and ponder what else is true? Who or what uplifts you? Where do you find strength? What do you need at this very moment to help you notice even the tiniest glimmer of light? I can say for myself right now, it's my community. It's my community of friends and colleagues who really shine a light on a pathway for me at times when I feel the darkest. And I can also say that it's also my family, my fur babies, my little doggies that I have. And I must say it's my granddaughter as well. And I guess it's also my faith in humankind. So those are a lot of things that uplift me. But why don't you just choose one of yours right now? And as you take that moment, describe one of your answers to yourself. And as you describe it, notice what happens on the inside. Try to really sense it. Let that experience, the sensations connected to what or who uplifts you, to what you find gives you strength, or what, the kinds of things that you need in this moment to help you experience even the tiniest glimmer of light, but really pay attention to the sensations connected to it. So as we're starting today, I also have learned that when we do what I've just suggested to you, that is one of the ways that we can illuminate our own pathway to be shown up in the world in our very best self. I have to say that I've been feeling a bit nostalgic and grateful today as I remember the month of February and all the meanings that it has to me for what I've been doing in the world for the last 20 years. So 20 years ago, I stood on the shores of Thailand, invited as a part of a small group to help in the aftermath of the devastating Asian tsunami. Amidst that sea of suffering, I witnessed something I felt was quite extraordinary. The unwavering hope and embodied well-being, which I'll call resilience of the Thai people. That experience long ago, along with my own personal journey, helped give birth to healing models that are accessible, affordable, adaptable, very scalable, ensuring that those in need can find a path to healing. And many of us in the United States and in the larger world may be feeling we need that path at this moment in time. I have been inspired many times in my travels over the last 20 years in the aftermath of disasters as I've journeyed to parts of Asia, Africa, Europe, the United Kingdom, and the United States. I have been introduced to lively and diverse cultures. I have danced, I've laughed, I've cried with young people in the Philippines and China and Turkey, Tanzania, Haiti, and Nepal. And I can say, when I'm thinking about the month of February, 3 years ago, I was inspired by the Ukrainian people. And I saw them, even in the face of war, as the Russians invaded their country. They found ways to nurture their community and healing. They focused on their utmost treasure, their children, seeking ways to guide them through the uncertainty of war. Through the organization Ed Camp Ukraine, I met with their communities during the first year of the invasion, sharing well-being skills and that I believe, and they've shared with me later, that became a beacon of light in the darkness, remind us all of the power of connection, generosity, and care. Now, through these experiences, I have come to understand our shared humanity. I've seen so many times around the world how much we are alike rather than separate from each other. I've met individuals from different religions, political beliefs, educational backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, sexual orientations, cultures, genders, identities, and abilities. And it really comes from this deep well of learning that I now offer some reflections. I'm calling these reflections dialogue, dignity, and democracy. We are living in an era of profound political and social upheaval where the foundational principles of democracy, dialogue, respect, and civil discourse are increasingly fragile. For the first time in my lifetime, I have heard widespread expressions of fear across the ideological spectrum. Conservatives, moderates, and progressives voice deep concerns about the state of affairs in the United States and its ripple effects worldwide. Today, I was talking to a world leader, and he was telling me about people because of how U.S. aid is being devastated right now, that people have to leave what are their homes where they've done such amazing work internationally. They've been given a month, and that's a very short time, really, to kind of wrap up your life and to come back home again. So there are the effects of the work that we do, but there are also the effects of families that are being impacted right now. I've had many conversations with colleagues, friends, family members, and clients, and they reveal this growing anxiety, and for some, it's been a depression over the tone and tenor of public discourse. Was once a space of kind of robust debate, even passionate disagreement, has been overtaken by rhetoric that often lacks basic human decency. The erosion of respectful dialogue has widened divisions and fostered uncertainty about personal relationships, professional stability, and even personal safety. One of the most troubling aspects of this climate is the palpable fear surrounding self expression. Many hesitate to voice their opinions regardless of political affiliation, fearing personal and professional consequences. Some people have shared with me how they worry that expressing their beliefs, whether in public, at work, or even among friends, could result in job loss, estrangement, or even threats to their safety. Increasingly, silence for some people feels like the safest choice. Yet I'm really going to pose the question and challenge all of us. I think we must ask ourselves, does silence in the face of political fear come at a profound cost? Historically, when voices of reason and moderation retreat, extremism often fills the void. Reluctance to speak out can lead to the normalization of rhetoric and policies that undermine democratic values, social cohesion, how we work together to solve problems, and I think very basic fundamental human rights. And also, it can strip away at our free speech. And when fear dictates our responses, society risks sliding into authoritarianism, where dissent is not just discouraged, but actually punished. And punishment can happen in many ways. It can be in ridicule, it can be in bullying, it can be of saying, well, I'm no longer going to fund X, Y, or Z, or I'm going to take away something that maybe you always hoped that you could continue to work in, helping refugees or helping those who are the most marginalized of society. And now the funds will dwindle. And how will people um, not have food insecurity? How will they have housing? There are so many things that could be put on the block right now that we all need to be aware of. So the role of human dignity in troubled times is something that I want to speak a little bit more about. In navigating this crisis, we can draw strength from the wisdom embedded in various faith traditions, all of which uphold the sanctity of human dignity. The book of Genesis, for example, expresses that human dignity emanates from divinity itself, affirming that every human life is sacred and embodies the presence of God. Shomali highlights that Islamic teachings emphasize principles, ethics, and guidelines dedicated to upholding human dignity. Ikeda underscores that in Buddhism, deep concern for an unwavering commitment to human dignity is fundamentally guiding, as a fundamental guiding principle. In Judaism, the belief that humans are created in the image of God establishes not only the right to dignity and freedom, but also the responsibility to protect them. No one has the power to strip away our dignity, even in moments of profound woundedness, when others attempt to inflict harm or dismantle what we cherish. Our intrinsic worth remains inviolable. Holocaust survivor Dr. Edith Eger poignantly recalls her mother's words in the cattle car to Auschwitz. Her mother said to her, "No one can take away from you what you put here in your mind." She, Edith later reflected, "I'm a human being who went through an experience. It's not my identity. It's not who I am. It's what was done to me." Her words remind us that dignity is not something others grant us. It is something we carry from within. I'm quite concerned about the psychological and societal cost of silence. I was talking to a colleague this morning, and she told me that there was a person who works as a birth attendant, a doula, in one of the southern states that was that was given the directive that she could no longer use the word trauma informed in her languaging. Now, at an individual level, self censorship like this can be psychologically and emotionally destructive. To suppress one's voice out of fear is to suppress a part of oneself. Over time, this erodes confidence, agency, and a sense of belonging. Shame may creep in, stemming from the inability to express opinions openly. Isolation deepens. Collectively, widespread silence creates a chilling effect, making it easier for misinformation, intolerance, and undemocratic policies to take root with little resistance. Fear based silence is not looked at, in my view, and my reflection as being neutral, but fear based silence can actually be complicit. The challenge is not merely recognizing the fear, but asking ourselves how we can respond in ways to say, how can we respond in ways that can that we can still hold on to what we believe is true and right and our deepest values? How do we uphold our respect and dignity in dialogue while embracing our convictions? How do we create spaces within our families, our workplaces, and our communities where people feel safer expressing themselves without fear or retribution? There is a power of speaking out, and being a child of the 60s, history teaches us that change is often driven by those who speak despite their fears. Voices that refuse to be silenced, even in oppressive circumstances. Let's think about who some of those people are: Nelson Mandela, Medgar and Marilee Evers, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Harvey Mudd. I am honored to know the daughter of Medgar and Marilee Evers, and how I see that she, in today's world, operates out of compassion and empathy and advocacy for what is right in the world. They carry on the legacy. She carries on the legacy of her parents. These individuals that I mentioned do not remain silent, despite the significant cost to themselves and their families. Today, we acknowledge them as heroes and heroines of our collective history. We cannot forget that history. We can't silence that history. If we hope to preserve democratic ideals, open discourse, human dignity, mutual respect, and collective problem solving, we must encourage and protect those who seek to engage in good faith. While the survival instinct to retreat into silence is understandable, history reminds us that silence enables oppression. To navigate this era with integrity, we must cultivate individual and collective resilience so that fear does not define the future we build for ourselves and for future generations. And I believe that resilience is a path forward. I've dedicated my life to building resilience models to help scale models around the world so that people can be able to lean into what's possible besides suffering, but also the healing that I believe is the way that we're designed as human beings as well as to suffer. And I think that what I've learned is about resilience acknowledges historical trauma and present trauma. And resilient individuals nurture their well being through wellness practices and surround themselves with people who uplift and respect them. They strive to maintain their own dignity and that of others, even when disagreements arise. Of course, this is easier said than done. And I must say, I am sometimes to blame that in the heat of an argument, emotions may run high and anger may take over. It may elicit something in me that's often the flight response of wanting to escape from the suffering that I'm experiencing. But I've also learned that it may take time, space, and reflection before we can return to difficult conversations with renewed perspective. But resilience means that learning from these moments, we can recommit to dialogue and continue the work of understanding. Now, the next question is, how do we nurture our humanity when we are faced with inhumanity? How do we find light in the darkness? One answer lies in cultivating what I call embodied well being, a resilience that embraces both our past traumas and our present strengths. This is not toxic positivity, but an intentional practice of honoring both our wounds and our capacity for healing and growth. Now, what I believe about resilience is it allows us to remain engaged, to express our convictions with compassion and empathy, and it reminds us that even in times of turmoil, we have the power to shape our world, not through silence, but through courageous, respectful dialogue. And I get guaranteed it's not easy. And it doesn't mean that we won't suffer, but it also, we have to ask ourselves, will the suffering be greater if we are silent? I now want to share with you concepts and skills that may help you find more light in the darkness. You know, many moons ago, when I was in Thailand and later had the honor of going to Haiti and working with Haitians who had survived their terrible earthquake of 2010, I learned some very important lessons. And I want to share some of those lessons as I think some of the light that is possible for all of us right now. And as I share some of the light that I know is possible for all of us to experience, I also want to say, I think to all of us, that there are definite ways that we can learn how to lean into that well being with intention. And a lot of it has to do with paying attention. So let me start with this aspect. And I want to talk to you first about what we call a perspective shift. And this perspective shift that I'm talking about has to do with what we call is an assumption, which and then an awareness and an action and a reflection. Well, when we think about how we change perspectives and how we shine light on suffering, there there are assumptions, conventional thinking that people are just bad. People need to be punished. You know, what is wrong with that person? What is wrong with them? And I think what was so brilliant about the trauma informed movement that really came out of a study that was done at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, California, that found that when people had certain um, conditions that had happened to them in their life, and if you looked at whether or not you had four or more of these adverse childhood experiences, that you actually it actually affected your not only your mental health, but your physical health. So what this trauma informed awareness brought to really our world was that people are suffering. People need to learn how trauma impacts a child's and adult's development, and that includes behaviors. And when people are acting in certain ways, what we also have to have as part of the equation is what happened to that person. And then when we understand those underpinnings of maybe there was a childhood sexual assault, maybe they were trafficked, maybe their parent was had an addiction, maybe their parent was incarcerated, um, maybe they were bullied in school, maybe they lived in an environment where there was violence. That what happens with that is that it can change the nervous system, that there's a physiological process that begins, and that how do we change that trajectory so that what happens to us when we're children that doesn't end up being a lifelong sentence. So that's what we, I think, have developed um, in the work that I've done is how do we take action? And that's what we call as resiliency informed, that people are resilient. And when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about their well being. People can learn how skills of well being can be cultivated and how they can reduce suffering. And they can actually start talking, and we can start talking about what is right about them. What are their strengths? How can we work to their strengths in developing policies, procedures that can help people prosper and grow? And then there's this next part, which is reflection. And actually, this was added recently by a friend of mine in Ireland. And she said, you know, when you take action, there's also a reflection that happens, which is also the incorporation of being trauma and resiliency informed. And that is that people can change and grow. People can people can learn to read their own nervous systems to build resiliency in themselves and others, and that people can learn that empathic listening um, is possible. And that as we listen compassionately to another, we actually create new community that not only balances our nervous system, but balances the people that we are in relationship with, that we are working with. So, isn't this lovely to think about the possibility that that can happen for all of us? So now I want to teach you a few things about the well-being practices. We found that you can use them across the lifespan. You can use them across culture with people that have different abilities and people who come from diverse backgrounds. And that we've learned that if we create a common language of how we talk about this, that it can have a very large impact in helping to change um, how people might view themselves. So think that we all have this zone of well-being that sometimes is called the resilient zone or the okay zone. And in this zone of well-being, we have all the emotions. We have excitement. We can be worried, anxious, we can be sad, we can be happy, we can be scared. But when we are in the zone of well-being, we can manage, we can handle the kinds of emotions that happen to all of us as human beings. But as we know, as life happens, and certainly for many of us in the United States and across the world in the last few weeks, people have felt that there have been thunderbolts that have come into their zone of well being. And instead of being in that resilient zone, that vitality of human experience, that you feel that you're stuck in a high zone, that you feel edgy, irritable, anxious, panicky. You may have angry outbursts and maybe say things to people that usually you are in good relationship with, and you're going, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to apologize to that person because I certainly wasn't in my zone of well being. And then we can also only stay up in that state for so long before we dive into a low zone. And, you know, many people have shared with me that not only have they been in this high zone in the last few weeks, but they've also been in the low zone, feeling sad and depressed and feeling they don't want to get out of bed. And, you know, they're having sleepless nights and worried about their future with this feeling of fear that's thrusting them into the present moment. So what's important about talking about the zones in this way, that it's really incumbent upon all of us to know that we can change the width of our zone. If we have a very narrow zone in this very moment, that we can learn strategies on how to expand that zone of well-being so that we can be able to better manage what life has ahead of us. You know, for some people, we have many people who've lost their jobs in the last few weeks, feel insecure about their future. Um, I think that certainly some of the things that are happening in the world. I mean, my family, we've been complaining about the cost of eggs. I mean, things that we've just used to have so normally in our household, now saying, okay, how much are the eggs going to cost this week? But there's so many things that are being thrust upon us. And I live in Los Angeles County, and certainly in the last month, that we have been devastated by the firestorms, as well as I know many people in the Carolinas and in Florida that have been devastated by the hurricanes and the flooding that's happened. So that there have been many things that have thrust us into the high and low zone. But I'm here to talk about the light. And the light I've learned can be as simple as learning basic skills. And we talk about these 6 skills of the community resiliency model and the trauma resiliency model as being in the palms of your hand. And I'm going to share a few of them for you today, because we've found that when people learn this, this is one of the ways that you can move from the darkness into the light to remember what is true about you. We also have a free app, and it's called iChill. And it is in 5 different languages right now. It's in English, Spanish, Ukrainian, Arabic, and Hebrew. But it's a way that you can learn wellness skills that can help expand your well-being every single day, so that wellness skills of the iChill app, for example, can become a practice that you can do on a regular basis. I talk about the first 3 skills as being tracking, resourcing, and grounding. But what I've known about the doorways of well being and how we again shed more light, sometimes it helps us when we're suffering to talk to a friend, to really say, oh, this is what's happening to me right now. I'm so worried about this or that. And then we can also say, we can talk about maybe feelings of sadness or feelings of worry or anxiety. But the other part that we've learned about cultivating your light is about sensing your well being. So it's not only what you think and what you feel, but it's what you sense. So we talk about something that's very simple. It's called tracking or reading your nervous system. Um, in schools, we've been using the word body literacy, just like you can learn to read or write. You can learn to read your nervous system. And you can learn to determine whether the sensations are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. I'm going to give you a personal example. I was watching way too much news and social media, and I found myself um, getting very anxious. I found my heart rate starting to beat fast. I felt heat in my body. Those are sensory words. And I've learned by creating these models and working with this, that's not good for me if I stay stuck there. So then I said, okay, Elaine, what are you noticing? Oh, it's definitely unpleasant. What can I do to do something differently to maybe sense something that's more pleasant or neutral? And part of that I learned is also being able to read my sympathetic nervous system. If my breathing is rapid and shallow, I am in a sympathetic action, a sympathetic part of my nervous system. That's preparing for action, but it also can be something that feels stuck when I'm anxious about something, where I can be sitting here in a chair and my heart rate's beating fast and I feel distressed. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is called, it's like our rest and digest part of our body. And when I first learned this, I said, oh, this is brilliant. Because I know if I start thinking about, let's say, my granddaughter, I immediately think of her sweet face. I just took a deeper breath, my muscles relaxed. I am now in a parasympathetic response. So I know that right now, because of world events, I have to dedicate more of my attention in paying attention to how I can access that parasympathetic part of my nervous system, because that's part of how I can bring myself more into the light. Because I've learned over the years that, for example, a sensation is a physical experience in the body. We all have sensations. So today in Southern California, it's a warm day. I went outside, I had a sweater on. I go, oh, I better go take my sweater off and put a short sleeve shirt on. So our sensations are always directing our actions, but they also are connected to our thoughts and our feelings. So if I'm experiencing the great love I feel for my granddaughter, I know that I just pointed to my heart. And I know that when I point to my heart, I'm feeling it very deeply inside of me. And so if I cultivate that in those times of distress, then I'm not just letting that distress build and build and build and build to the point that I'm getting sick and that I'm living in a constant state of either physical pain or psychological pain. So it's important for all of us to remember that when we learn to tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being, that even though we may be living in a very chaotic environment and uncertainty in what's happening in the world today, we have the choice of what we're going to pay attention to on the inside of our body. And do we want to pay attention to the sensations that are pleasant or neutral? And I really encourage us all to move into that. And, how do we do that? I mean, one of the ways that I've learned that is one of the best ways to do it is learning sensory words. And as we learn how to kind of read our nervous system, like if I'm thinking about my, let's say my granddaughter, and I wasn't feeling very well, but all of a sudden I brought her to mind, I might feel my body cooling down if it was hot. Or I might even feel my body getting warmer if it was cool. But I know that those different states have to do with my well-being and how I'm going to be cultivating the light that I know that exists in my body. So the best way I've found in order to be able to really read your nervous system is by paying attention to your personal resources. And that can be anything. It can be something real or imagined. It can be something, it can be your favorite character in a book. It can be a supportive person. It can be a dance move. It can be your faith, a prayer, a movie, a music, a certain dance move. Recently, I've been encouraging people to remember acts of generosity or kindness. When we remember an act of generosity towards us, or if we witness it, or we do an act of generosity towards someone, we actually have parts of our brain. We have generosity circuit in our brain that lights up because we have resiliency circuits, and it can actually make us feel better. It can bring tears to our eyes, but I call them, I've learned from a dear friend of mine, she calls them sweet tears. She's from one of the indigenous tribes of the central coast of California. And when I sense those sweet tears, it just brings a moment of respite and solace into what at times can feel, um, that I might feel a certain sense of anxiety regarding whatever's happening in the world. So I really want to invite you all to think about a personal resource, but it's more than just thinking about it. It also has to do with really describing it. It's kind of what we did in the very beginning, but I'm really going to invite you to spend some time thinking it's like you have a blank canvas and you're going to paint your resource on this blank canvas in living colors. And that even on this blank canvas, you can have smells, taste, touches that are pleasing to you about your personal resource. And that as you develop, I call this the resourcing recipe, as you describe all of this to yourself, I'm going to invite you, and I'm going to actually be a little silent for 12 seconds for you to create this and really sense it inside your body so that you can notice what it's like to bring attention to the sensation. So I'm going to count to myself 12 seconds. So you're going to hear some silence, intentional silence. All right. So what did you notice? I'm going to invite you to draw your attention to the sensations that were pleasant or neutral. And that's one of the ways that you can cultivate your well-being. And today I'm saying you're cultivating your light. That's one of the ways that you can do that. So it's not just thinking about your resource, it's sensing it. I'm going to tell you a little story. I was in Atlanta right before the pandemic, and I was training um, a number of wonderful chaplains that were working with the Department of Juvenile Justice. So they were working in these with these young kids in custody. And one of the gentlemen who had been a chaplain for many years, he came up to me the second day of the workshop and he said, "Miss Elaine, I'd like to tell you about something that happened to me this morning." And he shared with me, "I have been saying the Lord's Prayer every morning as long as I can remember. But today I said the Lord's Prayer and I sensed it in my body. And I never felt closer to God than I felt this morning. So I realized I just need to add that little ingredient to what I've been doing for all these years. And I can even have a deeper relationship with God." So, you may be thinking about a prayer that you like. Maybe that's a prayer that you can call in and that you can remember, that you can also sense. And that may be the very thing as you start your day that can bring more light to you during times of darkness. So I want to share a couple more things about um, what we call biology versus mental weakness. Because many people have shared with me, I've mentioned earlier about I'm not sleeping well, I'm waking up in the middle of the night, I'm tossing and turning, I'm worrying whether my job is going to be there or not. Um, we have known and seen all over the world there are common human reactions to stressful and traumatic events, and that wellness skills can help bring us back into a state of well-being. And so this is very, very important for us all to remember. And I've actually put together a little, and when I do my trainings, that there are common emotional reactions, thinking reactions, physical reactions, behavioral reactions, spiritual and relationship reactions. So for example, if you've noticed that you have been having tight muscles and your stomach is upset and maybe shaking a little bit, that can be a reaction to stress. If you've noticed that you've been feeling sad and crying, I've had one person who said, I just find myself sobbing a lot, which is not my usual way of being, but I'm just so afraid. So, I also want to remind people that tears can really help us when we're feeling states of sadness. And so to know that that's not a negative thing. Tears can actually release oxytocin, which is a calming hormone into our system that actually makes us feel better when we're distressed. But I want you all to know that there are common stress reactions. And if you have them, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That just means that you're incredibly human. That's part of the common humanity that I talk about. And that by really working on your wellness practices, whether it's through these skills that I'm sharing with you or your own that you have a whole box full already, that this is a time to bring them out with intention, because this is the thing that's going to really help you right now. Because I've learned that adversity is not destiny. And I believe that is one of the most important things that I've learned as I have traveled around the world, helping people after these kinds of traumatic events. So I want to say, as I'm getting ready to close today, that um, I'm really going to encourage you all to embrace your common humanity. I'm going to encourage you to try to stay in the present moment. And what I'm going to do as I end today is I'm going to lead you through a grounding exercise. This is one of a fundamental way that I've learned that can help us stay in the present moment. And if we're in the present moment, we're not thinking outside there in the future or back there in the past. We're right here. And at this moment, I have to say, with as hard as this last few weeks have been, I feel very present with my community that I know many of you are listening to me today. So I'm going to invite you for just this moment to bring your awareness to how you're seated or laying down or standing up, and just pay attention to how your body is making contact in this present moment to a surface. And as you notice say your back making contact to a chair or to the floor, or to a wall, or noticing the lower half of your body, your legs, your knees, your calves, your feet, as your feet are making contact with a surface. Also noticing your arms, your hands, how your hands are resting. Is just take a moment to notice yourself in this present moment. Pay attention. This is an invitation. If you notice your breathing, sometimes our breathing slows. Sometimes our muscles relax. For some of us, when we quiet the nervous system, we become aware of a lot going on there. And if that's your experience, if there's any discomfort or pain, know that you can stop and look around your space, or just draw your attention to some place on the inside that feels better, feels calmer, and just draw your attention there. So just take a few moments to savor your well-being, your ability to cultivate that. And remember that your well-being is your light, is your absolute light, and yet you can call it in, whether it's through a personal resource or grounding, connecting to a dear friend, going for a walk in nature, whatever it is that helps you come back into that zone of well-being. It's so important to remember that this light is available to you always. So as I end today, I always end my show by asking you what else is true. To call those things up to you right now. If you need someone in your life, and if you find that you've been isolating, I'm going to really invite you to reach out to someone. Reach out to someone you care about. If maybe you don't want to do that at this moment, maybe write. Get something to write with, get to your computer and write down your feelings, what you're experiencing right now. And maybe you can start it by saying, what else is true? But I'm going to ask you to do something. This is a homework assignment that you'll never get graded upon. But what are some of the generosities that you've seen? Maybe you've witnessed them. I heard a lot of the generosities around the fires. People brought clothing and diapers and dog food to donation centers. People opened up their homes to friends who had lost their homes. People were able to save their friends' animals because they weren't home. People did all sorts of things to show how much they loved and cared for each other, even strangers. So I know that there's angels in the world, and I just want you to think about the generosities, maybe the time when you were generous towards someone. Maybe you can remember that as well. So this is Elaine Miller-Karas signing off for Resiliency Within. Remember